Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and unfortunately today we have to start off talking about this scam that's been going around on YouTube for quite some time now. Basically, people are impersonating us on YouTube by making up a profile with our logo and using a username that's pretty similar to ours. They're going around telling people to message them on Telegram to receive a prize. Generation Tech does not have an official Telegram channel. This is a scam. Do not contact these people unless you are trying to troll them because you know they're freaking scammers. The only time you'll ever see me on Telegram is when I'm coordinating the logistics and movement of my large anti-dolphin partisan network. We're stationed in coastal regions all across the globe watching for dolphin incursions. It's a very important thing that I do in my spare time, but it has nothing to do with giving people prizes on Telegram. So I'm really sorry that a lot of you guys are going through this and seeing all of these stupid scams everywhere. The best thing that I can do is report these profiles when I see them, but it's all reactionary. So I think the best strategy here is to educate you guys about the threat of these stupid scammers, and I really love it if you guys pass this information to other people who happen to watch YouTube, which is basically everyone. So if you see random people, on your commute who you don't know, just tell them about this. I'm sure they watch YouTube or something. I don't know. Let's go on with the video. Now, during my research looking at the decommissioning of the clone army, I kept on looking for statistics about the clone troopers' numbers to get a better understanding of just how large of a problem the Empire was facing here with this decommissioning initiative. But very quickly, I ran into some problems that I always run into when I'm looking at the Star Wars lore, specifically the Disney canon. See, Disney canon in a lot of ways looks like Star Wars Legends. The larger events, battles, and Senate bills and characters appear the same, but Legends usually has a lot more details. And that's because it's been around a lot longer and there are a lot more stories and content written for it. I mean, the Legends period of Star Wars represented a time when the IP was a lot more chaotic and less restrictive, and so things were a bit more free-form, for better or worse. There's no really wrong way of looking at it, of course. Some people like Legends more, some people like Disney more. It comes up to personal preference. And that's because in the last decade or so, we've seen Disney use Legends as sort of a research library for all future content. New Disney content continuously draws from Legends story ideas and either just copies them or builds off them in many cases. And so, for a lack of better information, we will be citing some Legends sources here when we're talking about troop numbers for the Grand Army of the Republic. Now, when it comes to the clones, no Legends author is more controversial and important than Karen Traviss, author of the Republic Commando series, a former reservist with the UK Territorial Army and also a defense correspondent. Karen Traviss looked at the Clone Wars with a more realistic approach and put her viewers in the point of view of the clones on the ground. And very quickly, she started asking many of the questions that you see here on this channel today, like what happened to the clones after they get injured or when the Republic no longer needs them. Way before Generation Tech even existed, Karen Traviss was asking all of the hard, difficult questions about things that just didn't make sense with the Clone Wars. And I guess you could say that our channel owes a lot to her work, because I definitely read through the entire Republic Commando series. Another interesting thing about Karen Traviss was she had a very cynical view on the Jedi and the Republic, which of course you see a lot in this channel as well. In the Republic Commando series, we follow Republic Commandos. These were highly trained Special Force operatives who worked in groups of 4 behind enemy lines, and they were a part of the Republic Special Forces Division and had access to all sorts of classified information like troop movements and concentration of enemy forces, which of course is really important. And from very early on, the Clone Commandos came to the conclusion that the Separatist Droid Army had more than enough military forces to completely wipe out the Grand Army of the Republic as a conventional fighting force. Yet for some reason, the Separatist Droid Army never took advantage of their numerical superiority and, just completely wiped out the clones, which is why the Republic Commandos from the very beginning realized that there was something off with this war, which is why I like them a lot. I mean, they understood that there was something off before the Jedi even did, simply because they had intel and did a little bit of math. Now, just what was the difference in number between the Clone Army and the Droid Army? Well, there are a bunch of different sources, a bunch of different numbers, but they're all kind of jaw-dropping. Before we continue though, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, ownersaber.com, the best place for you to fulfill your lightsaber needs legally. We here at Generation Tech frown upon any kind of pilfering or looting of Clone Wars era battlefields for Jedi memorabilia. It's not right, and we totally wouldn't do something like that. Anyway, OwnerSaber.com wants to present to you guys with their newest product known as the lightsaber Scabbard. Made out of polycarbonate and aluminum, the lightsaber Scabbard is designed to fit your lightsaber while it's active, and it has cutouts so that if you light up your blade, it creates a really cool effect. The Scabbard itself can be attached to your belt via a D-ring. Right now, if you order a Padawan or Master level saber along with the Scabbard, you'll receive 50% off of the Scabbard. And if you order a Replica saber with a Scabbard, you can get the Scabbard for free. Just place all of the items that you want in the cart, including the Scabbards, and their system will automatically apply the discount at checkout. Check out the description for more information on this deal, and as usual, thank you so much for your patience. On to the rest of the video. So at the first Battle of Geonosis, the Republic deployed 2 full sector armies, or around 300,000 clone troopers. Amongst their numbers were those clone commandos we talked about. 10,000 highly trained commandos were deployed in parade formation on a massive battlefield with no cover in an area where their training gave them zero advantage, which is why more than half of these clone commandos lost their lives. And it's also why most Republic commandos did not trust the Jedi after this first battle. So anyway, the Republic had around 300,000 soldiers. That was all of the units that had been taken from Kamino that were battle ready. It represented the Republic's entire military capabilities outside of judicial forces. This battle was a huge gamble by the Republic and the Jedi, and I'd argue they should have lost this battle if it was fair. And that's because the Confederacy of Independent Systems had about 1 billion B-1 series battle droids deployed on the ground in defensive positions, and an additional 4 million in orbit that never were even deployed and just ran from the Republic the second their attack force appeared. If you guys watch this channel a lot, you've probably heard me say this quite a lot. An attacking force going up against an entrenched enemy position needs an advantage of 3 to 1, and we're just talking about very basic prepared defensive positions. What the clones had to do in the Battle of Geonosis was a lot worse. They had to run on foot for kilometers over open space to assault a heavily fortified industrial factory. The clones were outnumbered on the ground maybe 1 to 4, 1 to 5, and if you include the battle droids up in space, 1 to 20. And again, these numbers only count the B-1 battle droids. You also have B-2 battle droids, commando droids, droidicas, all sorts of other crazy things going on in the Separatist Droid Army that we didn't count for. We're being conservative, basically, is what I'm trying to say with these estimates here. Yet somehow the clones still won the day. Not through smart tactics or mobility or superior firepower, mind you. The Jedi just led all of their troops on a frontal assault, and somehow it all worked. If we don't take into account all of the other droid factories in the galaxy that were producing droids for the Separatist Droid Army, then the clones would have been outnumbered 1 to 20 on that first day when the war starts. And directly after the Battle of Geonosis, what survived of the Separatist Droid Army, which was the majority of it, just spread out across the galaxy and started attacking in every direction. It was during this time, as we mentioned before, that the clone commandos came to the conclusion that Count Dooku was just toying with them. They could have easily destroyed the clone army right then and there. This created a lot of anxiety for the Republic commandos, and they had every reason to be concerned. Even with their aging sped up, the most clones Kamino could produce in a year was around 1 to 2 million. Remember, unlike droids that could be created in a matter of minutes, clones had to be grown, which was a 9-year process. Now, a lot of our numbers, by the way, stem from this conversation between Kamino and Prime Minister Lama Su and Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi.
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
For the longest time, Star Wars fans have theorized that maybe unit doesn't mean just one clone, but like a unit of clones, anywhere from platoon to regiment size. If indeed Lama Su is talking about 1.2 million clone regiments, or well over 2 billion clone troopers, now the numbers begin to make a bit more sense. Especially when you consider the fact that Legends estimates that the Separatist Droid Army had probably quintillions of units by the end of the war. That's 18 zeros. Whew! Even more conservative canon estimates, like this one given by Dooku to the King of Toydaria.
Our droid armies outnumber the Republic clones 100 to 1.
Seem to indicate that the Republic was completely outnumbered. I used to be in the school of thought that the Republic clone army's size was just severely underreported, until I remembered how the Republics fought in almost every war since the beginning of time. Now, as you all know, the Republic during this period of time was emerging from a 1,000-year period of peace thanks to the Rusan Reformation, which more or less disbanded the federal military and the Jedi's role in it. Now, a lot of fans believe that the Republic completely demilitarized, and they criticize Republic leadership for being naive over this, but that's actually not what happened. You see, What did happen was the role of defense went from something that was shared between a federal military force and planetary defense forces to a system where you just had planetary defense forces. All of that funding that had been used by the federal military was now redistributed to the local defense forces. And so while the Republic was indeed demilitarized, it didn't mean that you could just gather a bunch of friends in their freighters and just take over a planet like Quat or Alderaan. They still had local planetary defense forces which could rip you into pieces. Arguably, during the post-Ruusan Reformation period, planetary defense forces had reached their golden age in size, training, and funding because of a lack of federal military. This is nothing new, of course, for the Republic. Throughout the course of Republic history, planets always had planetary defense forces. That was the one consistent thing, and they weren't all as small or weakly equipped as the one we see on Naboo. Star Wars' sense of scale sometimes can be confusing for us Earthlings who are used to just dealing with one solar system. You see, planetary defense forces can actually be very formidable. Just imagine if Earth were a part of a larger galactic-wide civilization. Instead of having national armies, we would combine our military power as a species into one larger entity that protects Earth and the solar system. Let's say we have a one-to-one transfer in resources, manpower, and equipment from our national militaries to this global military that we're creating. We would actually have a very formidable planetary defense force. Worldwide, there are currently 20 million soldiers serving, and we spend around $2.1 trillion on military defense on this planet. The United States spends about a third of that, more than a third of that. You can thank the Cold War for it. But wow, that's kind of nuts. Anyway, the 20 million soldiers alone would make any large-scale planetary invasion very costly and challenging. Even the massive Separatist Droid Army would have to think twice before expending tens, if not hundreds of millions of droids to pacify a planet like Earth. Although, given the poor state of our own orbital defenses, I imagine the Separatist fleet would just park their destroyers in orbit and threaten to bombard our cities. So maybe they wouldn't need to invade after all. And on a galactic scale, Earth would still be considered a light to medium populated planet. I mentioned worlds like Quat earlier simply because I know they have a very robust planetary defense fleet, and that's because their planet has that large ring-shaped shipyard. And so you can't just attack worlds like Quat because the Republic doesn't have a federal military. That's not how it works. And so the Republic's strategy during the Clone Wars, for the most part, was it relied on planetary defense forces of the Outer Rim to absorb as many Separatist assaults as possible to buy the Republic time to build up its clone army. Now, I have to mention that most of these Outer Rim defense forces were probably very small and designed to fight bandits and pirates, not gigantic droid armies. And so, yes, the Republic more or less sacrificed these Outer Rim worlds and their defense forces to buy their troops some time to regroup. The clones, who were some of the best trained and most elite soldiers in the galaxy, were used for offensive operations or to shore up weak points in friendly defenses on important worlds. The clones were never intended to serve as general frontline infantry. They were supposed to be like a vanguard shock force, sort of like the stormtroopers, as opposed to the Imperial Army troopers. And so the majority of the defending and defensive fighting during the Clone Wars would actually be done by cheaper and easier to raise planetary defense forces. It's not to say that the clones didn't do a lot of fighting. As a matter of fact, they were probably being constantly deployed to one hotspot after another without any respite or break. But still, they represented a very small portion of the Republic's overall fighting capability. And so I guess it's okay for the Grand Army of the Republic to be only, 1 to 10 million troopers in size, as long as you have this larger planetary defense force apparatus spread across the entire galaxy. Well, that is my theory on why the Clone Army was way too small. Let me know in the comments section below if you guys agree or you have any critiques of how I got to this conclusion. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.